I have complete trust that the chair is there. I trust you had a good but not excessive dinner, nor that you did indulge in intake of intoxicating beverages. It's a wake-up call. Just one or two little addendums, I don't know if that's the plural of addendum, to what we've been talking about earlier, manifestation and so on. It does work even for people who still have an ego, so it works better and becomes more beneficial for yourself and the rest of humanity if whatever it is that you want to manifest is motivated from a non-egoic place. But it's quite good to attain things that if the ego is still operating, the ego can sometimes, you can engage in sometimes helpful manifestation practices. They're not as powerful as when you are free of ego. But whatever you achieve eventually is not going to fulfill the purpose of making you happy, complete, or fulfilled. Course in Miracles says you will always know that the ego was the motivating force whenever you have achieved something, it hasn't satisfied you. It can satisfy you briefly, but not for very long. But I don't discourage anybody from practicing, because if you find out things that don't satisfy you, then eventually you may realize that nothing out there can satisfy you, because the state of ultimate satisfaction comes from the state of connectedness with being. Therefore, anything out there is simply an addition. Or as I like to call it, as I said, it's the skimmed milk, it's not the cream. And the skimmed milk will never satisfy you. Sorry if you're anti-dairy, it's not a good analogy. Then the skimmed milk nor the cream will satisfy you, literally speaking, but another little anecdote that came to me just now on the way here. I remembered a couple of weeks ago there was a US Open tennis championship, and for the women it was won by a 19-year-old Canadian teenager, supposed still a teenager, and she was virtually unknown before that. I was interested to hear in an interview She said that she started practicing meditation at the age of 12 and also started practicing visualization and manifestation techniques. She also said that when she's on court playing tennis, she's absolutely and completely in the present moment. And she said 3 years ago, she wrote herself a check to herself, and she knew approximately the amount of money she would gain by gaining the US Open. It was $3.5 million or so. So she wrote herself this check, had carried it for 3 years, and last week she received the check. A few years ago, Jim Carrey showed me, he pulled out of his wallet a check, I can't remember how much it was, that many, many years ago he had written to himself, but he carries it around. I think it was $10 million. And after a few years after writing it, he received that check for a movie. So you can play around with that. But remember, it won't make you happy. It's the game of form. And it's sometimes good to achieve a few things that you wanted to achieve and then realize that they don't make you happy. And often it looks as if you had made a mistake because you might have dedicated several years to something that ultimately was not right for you, but you were successful and you realized, well, it's actually making me unhappy. So a good thing is to realize that something you have been doing was not your correct path. One of the most useful things in life is mistakes. Make as many mistakes as many as possible, and then eventually you learn what your path is. And don't be afraid of making mistakes. And retrospectively, once you become present, all these things are no longer mistakes, because without them you wouldn't be here now. You would not have become present. You needed to go through this journey, which in many cases is many disappointments. Sometimes there's a disappointment of not attaining what you wanted to attain, and at other times it's a disappointment that you attained what you wanted to attain, but it did not fulfill its purpose of making you happy or any kind of deep, lasting fulfillment. So it's wonderful to have these disappointments. And sometimes instead of being what should I do? People ask, should I do this or should I do that? Some people become paralyzed through the inability to make a decision, because which way should I go? Should I go to a monastery and dedicate my life totally to, or should I apply for a job on Wall Street? And you may also notice you have different pulls. You may have one pull that is a reflection of two universal movements. One is the movement towards creation of form. The universe is moving continuously towards creativity. It delights in giving birth to form, to life forms, and that is reflected in yourself. There is perhaps you feel the desire to create, to manifest, to do things, to change this world, to participate, to create something, leave a lasting mark or whatever it is. That's the outward movement of the universe. And then that is the out breath, one could say. And then there's a reciprocal movement, and that is the in-breath. There's also something in you that is more interested in being than in doing. You feel the pull towards back to the source, back to awakening. And you may notice at different times in your life, or even at the same time in your life, both pulls, and sometimes the pulls can be so strong that you're paralyzed in the middle. This is why I gave the extreme examples of you can go wanting to go to a monastery for the rest of your life and not anything to do, and then the next day you think, oh, maybe it would be nice to participate and to become big and important and drive the big cars, and then Wall Street job looks suddenly enticing. So there's the doing and the being. They need to be balanced in your life. Not everybody is completely in the middle. Nobody is completely in the middle. You're either a bit more in the being dimension, or you're a bit more in the doing dimension, or you're very much in the doing dimension. You're very active, but there's always a remnant of awareness still there, so you don't lose yourself completely in the doing. And then the doing can be quite fruitful. And the other way is possible too, that you're very much in the being dimension without completely losing your ability to act upon the world, without completely losing your ability to do whatever your particular mission or task is in life. So you're most happy rooted in being, but you're still able to do, to fulfill to do your work, your task, whatever it is. Now, I'm always more pulled towards the being dimension, as you might have noticed. In fact, I must admit, because of that, I'm not really that well balanced, but I've come to accept that because there's no perfection on the level of the form. Sometimes I'm a little dysfunctional in the doing realm, but it's been fine. So the world hasn't collapsed because there's still 300 emails I haven't answered. The world is still there. I always admire Oprah. She has seemingly infinite energy to do, and she's continuously. How is it possible to have so much energy, and yet she is not completely lost in the doing. There's always some anchor in the being dimension, so she doesn't lose herself in the doing, although she's so much better at doing than I could ever be. She doesn't lose herself. So in a way we complement each other quite well. I'm much more in the being, but I can do, but I'm not that great at it. I only become good at doing when doing is concerned with teaching being. That's also a kind of doing, I suppose. I'm doing now. I'm speaking, so it's a kind of doing. So, and you yourself will have to see where you fit in the scale of the doing and being. You will. Almost everybody has the two present within. And you may remember from one of the books the term frequency holder that I used. And frequency holders in past ages would have been called contemplatives, and in past ages they would have lived in monasteries, people who have very little interest in achieving anything in this world, who just want to go within and be present. And there are a few, it's a very relatively small percentage of human who are real frequency holders who would find it very hard to function in this world. There may be one or two of you here, it's possible. You find it very hard to function in this world, and you're able to function within a small sphere of activity. If it's a simple thing, if you lived in a monastery or in a commune, you would be able to fulfill your daily tasks, that's fine. But you're not interested in doing anything beyond that. Our civilization has no place for these people, unfortunately, so we don't have monasteries really. There are still some, but not many people go there anymore. And so if that's your calling, then somehow you will be able to recognize it within yourself, if that is the case, and find some way of, find a sphere of activity where you can do little things, and be like gardening is a lovely thing that can easily be reconciled with being a frequency holder, or working something with your hands, making something carpentry, making something that you have your own place, your own job. You don't want to respond to anybody, and so frequency holders also have an effect on the collective human consciousness. Because you affect whatever your state of consciousness is, you will affect the totality of consciousness. And they can have an important function. This is why I call them frequency holders. They hold the frequency of presence. That's their main job, to embody presence in whatever they do, the little things they do. They're present in every movement. But where's the danger when you're a doer? The danger is that you completely lose yourself in the doing. And when you're a frequency holder, very much rooted in being, there is a danger that you can, without you realizing it, you slip from being above thinking to being below thinking. In other words, you could go into a kind of sleep after a few years. So you do your task, and without knowing it, then your level of presence goes down, down, down. But life has a good way of waking people up. So even frequency holders may get their shocks, whatever that may be. So life normally makes sure that you wake up again. Those are the wake-up calls that everybody gets. So if let's say you're a gardener, and after a few years it becomes such a routine that without you realizing it, you lose your presence, and then suddenly something happens. I don't know what. All your plants get eaten up by some insect, or whatever it may be, or in your family suddenly there's a huge, or something happens to your body. All kinds of wake-up calls are possible. Let's have some questions, if there are any questions have survived in you. And perhaps after the questions we can have also a little bit more stillness. Not that we're going to lose the stillness completely, even while questions are being asked. That's part of the art of living. Even when the mind is engaged, be aware of the spaces between thoughts. When you listen to somebody, just listen. Be completely alert, completely attentive. The art of listening is a meditation in itself. Alert listening. I'm listening.
Okay, I'm trying to be present.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing the wisdom and the truth to this world.
Thank you.
For the past few days, I'm really enjoying a lot of stories from you and Kim about you. So that make you that make you a human. So I know the human part of you as a human being. So I have a couple of questions on the human side. The first one probably a little on the surface. The second one's a little deeper. But I would expect equivalent profound answer from you. So the first one, when was the last time you remember that you went unconscious? And what happened? And how did you recover? That's the first question.
Oh.
You want to answer this first, or?
Okay, I am going through my mental files to see if I remember.
Yeah, I guess probably a long time ago, but I'm curious.
Yeah. Okay, well, occasionally it happens that there is a slight movement, a pull that could, for example, irritation, a pull. You can see a slight pull of irritation goes sort of like tugging on your sleeve. And then immediately you recognize it. And that happens occasionally. Last time it happened, but then I give you another example after that where I actually got angry. But so,
Okay.
I was in a supermarket doing some grocery shopping a few weeks ago, and so there were two people ahead of me. I think a man and his daughter, and I was there. I put everything out, and then the man had forgotten something, so he went off to get it. So in the meantime, the cashier had to wait, and waited 2 minutes and 3, and she said, well, maybe he can't, the cashier said, maybe he can't find it. I said, why couldn't this lady pay, and then he can pay again when he finds it? The cashier said, no, that doesn't work because she doesn't have any money, so we have to wait for him. And 5 minutes passed. He probably couldn't find what he was looking for. I could feel a slight irritation. And now the really funny thing comes now. After 5 or 6 minutes, he arrived, and he came, and then he looked at me and said, oh my God, Eckhart, I've been waiting for this moment all my life. So it's a good thing I didn't get irritated. So the beginnings of irritation can happen occasionally, but not, and then dissipates. I got angry I can't remember when it was, I saw a man feeding the ducks in the park, and there were lots of little ducklings, and there was a sign, signs everywhere, do not feed the ducks. And the ducklings were there. He was feeding the ducks were distracted, they got the food, and then a big blackbird came, and got one of the ducklings and flew off with it. So I got angry at this man. I remember that. I can't, because there's a reason why this, and I told him, can't you read? There may be other that I don't remember right now, so occasionally the more thing is, it's not absolutely necessary, perhaps or even possible, to be 100% free, as long as you're a human being, to be 100% free of these things, nor should you beat yourself up if you experience moments of unconsciousness. The important thing is that you don't prolong them more than is necessary so that they dissipate fairly quickly. Animals get angry sometimes with other animals. They can get... but they don't think about it afterwards. They don't revive it in their heads, as humans often do. So a human emotion can last for a long time because it's constantly being revived in the head. Also, things like mourning when somebody dies, it's a natural thing for most people to be sad or to have... although the lady yesterday was so deeply connected, she felt only a little bit of that. But it's you might weep, and that's fine. But if you're still weeping a year later, that means that's an unhealthy way of prolonging an emotion that should have a natural lifespan. And then you connect with being again, and then you realize that which is beyond death. But any event that happened in the past that still makes you either angry or irritated or whatever it is, years later or many months later, whatever it is, you have to look at that so that you don't revive emotions continuously through dwelling on it mentally, reliving the situation. This is a fairly common thing for humans to do. That's why I gave the example in The Power of Now for the ducks. Well, here we come to the ducks again. Two ducks getting into a fight. That was the same pond where this other thing came, where I observed these ducks years earlier. And the two ducks get into a fight, and every time it's like they get into a fight, they probably get what we would call anger. It's kind of, and then suddenly it's over. Then they go each their separate ways, and then always after fighting, the duck kind of sits up on the water a bit and flap their wings vigorously, and then they swim as if nothing had ever happened. And a minute ago they were angry. So that is letting go of the surplus. I interpret it as letting go of the surplus energy that came because they were fighting. So another thing to do with unconscious reactivity. The more conscious you are, the more quickly you catch it. You're aware of it. It's when you're not very conscious, it could be days later that you look back and say, oh, I must have been completely unconscious when I said that or did that. And then gradually the time span shortens. Then you're conscious immediately after it's happened. And then the next thing is, you're actually conscious while it's happening. It may still be happening, but you're conscious while it's happening. So you're not, and this applies to pain body. I know Kim probably already talked quite a bit about the pain body. We may talk about it again either tonight or tomorrow morning, because this is all connected to that. Don't make impossible demands upon you, and accept your imperfections. Have compassion with yourself. I am not a perfect human being. On the level of being, I'm perfect, but on the level of human, nobody can be perfect. What you gain here, you lose there. And there are always things that you're not good at. There's certain characteristics you may have that may irritate some people. If you married the Buddha, I think after a while you would get very irritated at some of his characteristics. Why is he always so peaceful? He's always smiling. And what was the next question?
Next question is about death.
Yes.
You said it's good that we find death before death find us. That's meaning the death of ego. That's very comforting. But when we are all immortal, there will be one day, as a human, we will lose that form of us. We will be pure being, pure observer. We're not observing anything. It's take you 2 books to explain to us, maybe more than 2 books, about being and doing. But what would you see that moment, there's no doing, no form. It's just the being. I know this is probably the other dimension you would see, but what would you tell us about that?
I don't know. That's a complex question. All I can, based on what I experience, is there is a dimension within that is transcendent to this dimension. So it transcends this dimension. And when I interpret it, I use certain words. And sometimes the words that I use are words that have already been in use for hundreds of years in some other spiritual traditions. I might quote Buddhism or the deathless realm, or I might just say, the essence of who you are is beyond death. And that comes out of an inner realization. I don't know much beyond that. So you'll have to wait and see when you actually die.
Next 2 books. Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste, Eckhart.
Namaste.
I came from India to meet you. And I know many people told me in India that why are you going all the way to America? There are enough gurus here to guide you. And in New York City, they thought I was wacko because why are you coming to New York for a teacher's course on meditation?
I'm coming to India again in a little while.
That's wonderful.
Early the year after next, in perhaps January, February of the year after next.
21. 2021. Okay. I'd like to be involved.
One always needs to add, because the universe is, the sense-perceived universe is fragile, so it's always good to, traditionally one adds God willing, or you could add, if I'm still in the body. But if I'm not in the body, I may also come to India. So,
Okay, I would like to be involved in that trip in some way. But my question to you really is that, this moment is a little difficult for me because I've been thinking about it for a number of days. And the question is that in India we believe that the teacher's gaze, his touch, and his blessings can transform everything in one moment.
Okay, you have to speak more slowly. I didn't get it because you're a little bit emotional now, so
Yes.
your it affects your voice. And
Okay, I'll repeat.
yeah.
So in India we believe that the teacher's gaze, his touch, and his blessings can transform your whole life in one moment.
Right.
Can I have the experience of that one moment with you?
Now, that's a beautiful thing, and in very rare cases that may happen, but it's extremely rare because there have been many great teachers in India, and there's a continuous line of teachers, uninterrupted line of teachers that's emerged spontaneously in India. They were all surrounded by many disciples in their ashrams. Only in very, very few cases has this happened that the look immediately transformed the seeker. There must be an extraordinary degree of readiness. It's like an apple that's so ripe that all it takes is a little and it falls off the tree. And I'm happily engaged in looking at you and gazing at you. Whether or not it brings about a total transformation, I don't know. But it is true, though, that the fire of presence or the power of presence can, to some extent, be transmitted. It even happens here on a collective basis, not as intensely as it would if I were gazing at you for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It will. The example I give is like it's a fire that ignites or amplifies your fire, because my presence and your presence are not two separate presences, and ultimately my consciousness is no separate from your consciousness. We are one consciousness. So I do recommend, though, that you don't cling too much to the belief that somebody will liberate you. Somebody may be of great assistance in your own liberation, but ultimately only you will liberate yourself, or the consciousness that arises from within you will emerge more fully, and then that will be perceived as liberation. But don't look to anybody, whether still in the body or no longer in the body, but use the help that you give. Even a little photo, for some weird reason, can be helpful. There's one particular photo, for example, of Ramana Maharshi. It is one photo that was taken. I don't know how old he was. He was in his 40s, I suppose, or 50, probably 50, where the photographer caught him when he was gazing into the camera or through the photographer beyond the camera. And there's an incredible openness in him. When you look at that photo, you immediately, I have it at home, I immediately sense not Ramana Maharshi, I sense the presence. It's my presence, it's his presence, it's nobody's presence. Immediately it's so beautiful. So you can use that, always realizing you're not looking at a person. So that you're looking, it's like the person is the window frame, and what you see with your senses is the window frame. But somehow it's miraculous that it can work with the photo too. It can put you in touch with yourself. All I can do, or any teacher can do, is reflect back to you who or what you are. That's all. So that it's no more than that. So it would take you astray if you looked for a teacher who could do it for you. teacher can be of great help, but it is something that arises from within you when the moment is right. It's like an apple. It falls when the moment is right, and an apple that's not yet ripe can come to mix the analogies. The apple could come to many teachers and workshops, and the apple still wouldn't fall. Not that apples go anywhere, but so that's how it is. I've been looking at you for a little while now, and I'm still looking, and I would be happy looking at you for a little longer, but it's not necessary. What you're seeing here is only a reflection of yourself, that's all. It's always and never not been just yourself. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My false self is thrilled to meet you. Two questions. Would you mind sharing some higher truths that you have accessed that you have never shared before? Something that would... something that might explain what you wrote about in one of your books about being able to touch, connect to Source. You said that you can easily connect to Source. Could you share truths that would explain that experience and what Source could be described as?
Well, if there was something that I have been withholding, then would not be a good thing. So what can be said in words is very limited. Every word is very limited, and to some extent, every word distorts the truth also. The moment you talk about even to name the unnameable, even to talk about consciousness, is not only a limitation, to some extent it's also a distortion, because by naming it you make it into an object of consciousness, which it isn't. So all the words that are used are not, can be misleading if you pay too much attention to the word itself, because the word is not it. Or as the Buddhists say, the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. So you're expecting another finger, and you think, if I give you another finger, then you'll get there more quickly. Or you can get more than two. Just you need to take the words and see what is it that the word points to, and then let the word, which is no more than a signpost or a pointer, let the word sink in so that it takes you in the right direction, which is completely beyond the word. It's completely beyond it. So you have to let go of the concept in order to realize what it is that the concept is pointing to. And perhaps you have not been able yet to really let go of the concept, and for this reason you're looking for another concept. So, but if you're able to completely let go, let the concept work in you, don't believe in it as some ultimate answer. The concept is not the answer and is not the truth. The ultimate truth is not in the concept. Tao Te Ching, the famous, wonderful ancient Chinese book, the Tao that can be named is not the true Tao. Tao is the ultimate reality, whatever. The Tao that you can speak of is not the true Tao. That's the first sentence in the book. And then he continues to speak about it. But he has given you a warning at the beginning. Whatever I say, don't make it into a mental idol and believe that will offer some ultimate explanation. These are only, it's like a little bit more like poetry. It's more like a go this way. So instead of asking for additional pointers, use the pointers that you already have, let them sink in, and then become still inside. If I say stillness, inner stillness, it is one of the pointers, inner stillness. Don't say, okay, inner stillness is really important. I need to cultivate inner stillness. And I believe that inner stillness is ultimately liberating. Okay, so are you going there? Well, but I need to know a little bit more about inner stillness before I can become still. Can you please explain a bit more, because I need another explanation. Then perhaps I can be still. No, because I could give you 100, and the mind would still ask. It's not you asking; it's your mind asking, and that's fine. That's what the mind does. So the mind would also ask, instead of, do you know what I mean by stillness? I'm asking you that question, and don't answer it. But just, I'll ask you that question again, and then I'll wait for 10 seconds, and then you can either shake your head or nod or shake. So, do you know what I mean by stillness? Find out. I'll give you 10 seconds. You got it?
I have experienced surrender. I have experienced stillness. Surrender was heaven on earth.
Okay, you got it.
Thank you. I have absolutely no idea where this next question came from, but I will give it to you. If you could say anything to your mother and father right now, what would you say?
To a mother and father?
To your mother and father. If you could say anything to your mother and father right now, what would you say?
I loved you and I still love you. It's the explanation. Both my mother and father had a big superstructure of ego, and I was able to love them because I no longer reacted to their ego. The being of my mother and the being of my father are beautiful. I loved their being, and I still love their being. And they know that, and they could feel it deep down. But the being was heavily obscured by egoic structures. And it took me quite a while, and only after the shift in consciousness was I able to look beyond it and forgive them. Now, I have already long forgiven them. Forgiveness in a deeper sense is to look through the ego in people. I'm just offering a slightly more, slightly different view of what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is when you don't confuse the ego in people with who they are. And I always loved the being, but for a long time, until I was 29, I could not sense their being because I could not sense my own being. I could not really love them. There was a kind of emotional attachment. There was a lot of irritation with my father and anger and blaming. And my father left us when I was 11. He left the country, and my mother was destitute. There was nothing, just no money, nothing. And it took me a while to see that he acted, that every human being acts according to their level of consciousness at any given time. And in later years, he felt guilty about it, I know that. And to some extent, he tried to make up for it when he was able to. But to assure them that I love them, but I don't need to say that. There's nothing that I need to say to them, because that is a reality that's beyond words. There's a connectedness with their being, not the person. the person is kind of evaporated, the being that they are. And then I could suddenly forgive them, for you forgive the ego in people. It's not necessarily forgiving what somebody has done to you, that can also be the case. But in a deeper sense, you forgive a person when you don't confuse their ego and whatever behavior they manifest through their ego, when you don't confuse that with who they are. I know that they are not their ego. I knew it then. I know it now. I have nothing to say now like I forgive you. That's long, long gone. There's no need to say I forgive you, because there's no longer anything to forgive. So, since you're asking that question, let me ask you about your parents.
They've both passed.
Sorry?
Both of my parents have passed.
And what would you say to them?
Pretty much, I've studied you for 15 years. I would say what you have just said.
And were you able to, in their lifetime already, to forgive them?
Not my mother. She passed 12 years ago. My father, yes, he just passed last May.
Right.
So from your teachings, I have actually become a psychic medium. I was actually able to look to see who was going to be greeting my father before he passed, and that made it very peaceful.
Right.
So I thank you for your teachings.
Well, thank you.
They have changed my life.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So your teachings invite us to let go of the personal story and just enter the moment very directly. And this has been so transformational for me over the past years. And I also find some value, and maybe more so the last few years, of occasionally kind of dipping into a past chapter, like reading, old journal entries and seeing kind of how my mind was.
Yes.
And feeling the emotions and some lingering. It's almost like maybe some of the pain body that's still there. And there's sort of a sense of maybe that I can have compassion for that earlier self and kind of feel a sense of perspective, healing perhaps. It's almost like there's a little pocket of my awareness that was trapped in a bubble, and I've kind of brought it back. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and perspective on this type of work, and what guidance you'd have or any cautions that you might have.
The type of what work?
Of sort of taking maybe a past memory or challenge and kind of spending some time exploring it through writing or reading, looking at old photos or reading old journals and things like that.
That is your past, things that happened in your past.
Yeah.
So what you're looking at may sometimes be past where you were less conscious and you did certain things then that you would not do now. You recognize them now as unconsciousness. So to contemplate that is fine. To identify with it, which I don't think you do, or maybe would be very misleading, because if you look back and see you are really unconscious like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it is, and you see what you said to somebody, what you did to somebody, actions you took, things, the entire world view at the time, it was all unconscious. And sometimes people remember that, but they're not free when they remember it, because they still think that is an essential part of who they are. So they still derive a sense of self from past unconsciousness. And the name for that is guilt. You don't have that, I believe. And
it's not so much things that I did. I think it's more challenges or grief from a relationship that... But yeah, maybe it was also things I said or did that if I hadn't said or did.
Yes.
But it feels like I'm coming to it from a very different, almost more objective perspective.
Yes.
Or more compassionate perspective.
Yes. So what is the reason why you like going there?
I guess I would say I can sense sometimes I still have pain body. I still have areas where sometimes a memory might come up or an emotion that feels like it's connected to the past.
Right.
So that's where I've sometimes done a little excavating of the past. But I do it cautiously and with an awareness of it could be seductive and it could pull me in.
Yes. That's right.
Yeah.
Now, this may not be the case with you, but I do want to mention it that guilt is quite an obstacle for many people. It may not be for you, but since you asked the question about your past, it kind of fits in with that. So if you look back at the past and you see that your behavior at the time was very unconscious, and perhaps you did something that you very much regret, you cannot be undone. This is a general remark. It's not a specific answer yet to your question, but it'll come. It's because so many people are concerned with that, the guilt that lives in them. How does it arise? It arises because you see your past actions and you're mistaking the unconsciousness that you inherited because you're where you are on this planet, and you manifested the unconsciousness of humanity at the time that you were part of, and that unconscious behavior is not an identity. It's not who you are. It was the movement of unconsciousness in you, and it does not touch the essence of who you are and never did. The same is vice versa is applied when you cannot forgive somebody else who did something, and you transform something that somebody did, could be your parents, unconscious parents. It's not uncommon to have unconscious parents, except nowadays there are parents who are relatively conscious. That's in my generation never happened. At least I never met any. So then to mistake with somebody's unconscious behavior for who they are that is also misleading. Forgiving is to recognize that it was the movement of unconsciousness in the other. So it's not, you don't need to personalize it. It's human unconsciousness. It's human. That's how suffering arises. So it seems that you take, it's quite a pleasurable thing for you to kind of take your mind and go into the past and look at things that happened.
I wouldn't say necessarily pleasurable, but sort of, I felt sometimes that I connect to kind of a heartfulness, that's sort of a sincerity and sort of a care that feels like some sort of release almost. But again, it's kind of in moderation that seemed to have helped in some ways.
Well, it can sometimes happen that if you bring presence to something that happened in the past, there's a memory of the past that something had not been completely resolved, and then you go back in your mind to it, but now you bring the state of consciousness of presence to it, and that can just undo something that has not yet been undone and requires to be undone. So, and that can be a good thing. But anything that you overindulge in is no longer a good thing. So it's always knowing when it's time to stop and just return into the present moment. So never overdo anything, as the ancient Greeks said. One of the most famous apart from know thyself, the other most famous dictum of ancient Greece was nothing in excess. Nothing, which means always find the middle way. Anything that is good, too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing. That applies everywhere. I read recently about somebody who discovered how cleansing it is to drink plenty of water. And she thought, well, if that's cleansing, and it is very cleansing to drink water, it's good for the body. And he said, well, if I drink even more, that must be even better. And then if I drink even more than that, it must be even better. In the end, she died. Too much water. So anything that is excess, so don't make sure that there isn't a pull that takes you too often into the past. Mm-hmm. Occasionally you can dip in there and then always come back to the present and do it in a more focused way, so not in a daydreaming way, right. That when you're walking along the beautiful nature here, you're suddenly thinking about something in your past. It's better to do it in a more focused way. Set aside the time period and you sit down and then you go there and look at it, bring presence to a past memory, and somehow sometimes you may find you can liberate the memory of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, now I can see you. Before I could only see the microphone.
I'm really grateful for the opportunity to ask a question. Thank you to the chooser, the selector. You know how they say, when the student is ready, the teacher appears?
Yes.
Your teachings found me in last Christmas.
Oh.
At a most auspicious time.
Oh.
So thank you.
Did somebody give you a book, or how did it happen?
The universe, it's amazing.
Oh.
My husband actually gave me your 2 books, and he has no interest in really spirituality. It's really special. And I read The Power of Now the beginning of the year. And the words spoke to my essence at a time when I've had health issues in the past few years. And I had been kind of forced to stop working at the end of December. And suddenly this illness, quote illness, had a purpose, and so I was given the diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome.
Right.
I cannot do anything.
Oh.
It's an amazing gift. Very challenging.
Yeah.
I was a doer.
Oh.
Anyways, so my question does have something to do with being and doing. In the practice of awakening and practicing presence, when we stop doing, it's easier to have access to that stillness and connectedness. And I can imagine that once you have a certain baseline of that if you start doing, you can kind of keep, as you were explaining. However, there are all sorts of doing. So if it's doing with the physical body, I could imagine that you can connect to the inner body while you're doing. However, what if doing requires thinking? My work was a lot about thinking, and I'm actually going to retire because it's medically impossible, but spiritually impossible to continue what I was doing. So my question is about how can one practice presence when doing requires thinking?
Right.
I don't know if that's clear, the question.
Yes, good question. I believe everybody would be interested in that question. And you're right, at first it's easiest to be present when you're not doing anything, when you are somewhere in nature, or you're alone in a room, or you're in a protected environment like here. That also can be very helpful. So you can be present when you sit quietly in a chair and you start to come into the body, and You look around, and, oh, it's lovely. Or you do your meditation. Some people have a meditation practice and are present then. And then some people for a long, long time become dependent on being inactive in order to access some kind of presence, even some degree of presence. They cannot reconcile activity and stillness. They think in order to be still, I need to sit still. And if they start moving, they begin to lose it. So you're right, at first, and it's not a bad thing, at first you may become familiar with stillness when you're not being disturbed, when you're somewhere quiet, and take time away from doing and just cease all doing and just be. It's great, as long as nothing disturbs you. But even the slightest thing, meditators know that when you're a meditator, unless you're a really good meditator, the slightest thing can be disturbing. Any noise from outside suddenly, or thoughts, of course, are even more disturbing than noise. But the next thing is, yes, using your body to some kind of bodily activity, doing something with your hands, doing something, making something, working in the garden or working in the kitchen perhaps, doing something with your hand. It's still perhaps you can remain present, it's a little bit more difficult than when you're sitting absolutely still, but you can learn to be present in the doing, and that's a wonderful thing. When you learn, you can move about and do what you have to do. And by the way, you'll be surprised how many things you can do without interference of thinking. For example, packing your suitcase. When you're at home packing, it's always this is a weird example, I'll come back to that. It's always the most time-consuming thing is when you travel is to, especially I find this when we go on tour for 6 weeks, different kinds of weather, different climates, what do I take? So there's a suitcase there. I'm describing doing now in presence. There's a suitcase there, and then you need to select what it is you're going to put in. Once the put is packed, and then you have to repack many times from place to place, it's easier because it's all there. But when you have to choose, then how do you choose? There's one way of choosing, which is you go into your mind and you start, okay, what do I need for that kind of weather? Would that be there's a lot, you can have a running commentary while you are getting ready, while you're packing and trying to select. You can also just look. This is another way, it's a wonderful practice, and this is just only one example of many instances when you can practice that. You can look and know what it is you need without any mental commentary. And that's an amazing thing, because you just look, but you're not talking to yourself. You just look. You can do almost the same in... You can go into a supermarket and see what it is that you need without any mental commentary. Of course, you may want to have a list. That sometimes you need a list. But practice, there are many things you can do accessing non-conceptual intelligence, and that is presence. You can easily do cleaning, like dusting, or I don't know if anybody still does dishes with dishwashers, but you still have to load the dishwasher and unload the dishwasher if you have one. You can do that. Again, there's no need to think. You just do it and use it as a link. The action actually keeps you present. The doing can keep you present. I mentioned the weird example of looking at the dial of a watch or a clock. If it doesn't have numbers on it, it just has the hour hand and the minute hand. And you look at it, and you can know what time it is without any mental noise. So you can know. It's only when somebody then asks you, then you say, oh, then you have to go into a completely different mode, and then you can verbalize what time it is. So you can know many things without conceptualization. In fact, you access a deeper intelligence. So when you are active doing something, then I recommend that to see how many things you can do without mental commentary, and you do them better. Everybody knows that, for example, with driving a car, if you learn to drive a car, then it's very hard at first. I learned to drive at a relatively late age because I was in my early 30s because I had a bicycle until then, and even after that I still couldn't buy a car. But I learned in England where many streets are narrow, so you have to, do I fit in here or not? There's a car coming in the opposite direction. Should I stop or should I go? If I go, are we going both fit? Can we go past in half a room? Can't decide. What do I do now? Oh my God. I was not very good at it. Some people would claim I'm still not very good at it. But I think I am, because I've been driving without an accident. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, for several decades, and I look like a bad driver to a passenger. It looks like this is so weird, but somehow it works. And so after my test in England, I had an instructor. I got some lessons, so I was in his car. And he waited after the test, he was waiting there, and then we got back from the test. I got out of the car, and I had already been told by the examiner that I passed. I was surprised, but he was even more surprised. He said, "You passed?" Two more times did I have to take a driving test, once in Canada and once in California, and each time I just barely passed. The one in Canada said, well, after taking the test, he is sitting there, well, what do I do with you? In the end, he was compassionate, and I passed. So this is just a side story. The main thing is you can see how you can be active without excessive or any conceptualization. Many things you can do, and it's a wonderful practice. Now, the difficulty really starts when you start thinking, and then to stay present when you think is quite a task. Why? Because there's such momentum behind the mind that the moment you start thinking or speaking, it drags you along. It absorbs your entire consciousness. It pulls your entire consciousness in, and every thought wants to grow and produce other similar thoughts, and it wants to take over your mind. And you can see when you observe people how the moment they start talking to somebody, how they're totally in the mind stream. And again, that any sense of spaciousness or presence is lost completely. But the same person might have been sitting there in wonderful his presence before he was approached by somebody else, and then somebody else approaches. Can you lend me $100? You're asking me again? You still haven't returned the $200 I gave you the other day. And immediately you're taken over by the mind. You can often see it when people have a discussion or something, how each person is completely taken over by the mind stream. And the person isn't really there, the real being isn't there anymore. It's only the mind. So how do you have access to spaciousness even while you're thinking? Now, or speaking. It requires a minimum of awareness to know that thoughts are happening in you, and see that come to the end of a certain movement of thought. When you're thinking about something, what do I have to do now? Then you start thinking about it, or somebody calls you, and then there's a discussion on the phone, and you put the phone down, and then you continue to think about it. And always see if you can find spaciousness find the end of a particular thought stream or particular thought. Find the gaps between thoughts. When you're talking to somebody, it's relatively easy, surprisingly, because having a conversation with somebody requires listening. And every time you listen, you can be alert and practice alert, spacious listening, instead of preparing the next thing you're going to say, or already in your mind disagreeing with what the person is saying, or having something else to add in your mind. Instead, practice real listening, which is alert presence. Then you have a space. Every time you listen to the other person, you're present. Then, when you start speaking again, some of that presence will remain with you, but you still have to be alert, so that you also become aware when you have said what you needed to say, stop. So that the mind doesn't become self-serving and you carry on talking and talking and talking. So you say what you have to say, then come stop. When you're thinking about a problem, then what are the possibilities? What can I do? You might even take notes or whatever. I don't know if people still write by hand, but take notes on your phone. And when you don't know what else, always step back from thinking. When you're trying to solve a problem, apply your mind, then step back from thinking. Either just stop thinking or just contemplate the sky, feel the inner body, take a conscious breath, go back into, and then after a few minutes, start thinking again. Then it is possible, if not likely, that some of your thoughts will be an original thoughts. So you fluctuate back, you step back into stillness or presence after you have applied your mind, and then the mind comes to a full stop. I don't know what else to do. There's a problem here, I need to do something, I don't stop. Go into stillness. So you go back into stillness and then back into thought. That's initially a good practice. But after a while, when it becomes second nature, even that isn't necessary anymore, because then naturally you don't lose connectedness with presence even while their mind is engaged, and that's a wonderful thing. That's of course, that's the only thing I can give talks, is by staying connected to the stillness or the presence within. Otherwise, there would be nothing forthcoming, or I would be talking nonsense. So the power comes from there. The true power comes from that deep level of your essence. So to stay connected with that, it's a continuous practice at first. To be thinking and at the same time not being taken over by your mind, to be able to use your mind, not be used by your mind. When you're on the computer or any of these devices, also very dangerous, because they pull you in this. They are like an externalization of the mind, and the mind can pull you in. Or your phone can pull you in. It's like, it has an addictive quality, as everybody knows, and your attention goes there. It pulls your attention out of you. Years ago, I talked about television, how excessive watching of television does that. It pulls your attention out of you, and you enter a hypnotic state. Nowadays, it's even worse than before. People don't watch television that much anymore, but they interact with their devices. And the device is an externalization and an amplification of your mind. So you have to be very careful that you bring in, that you do not live, and many people do, with a mind that is continuously cluttered. And this is a dreadful fate, to live in this world full of mental clutter, and there's no respite. Every time every time you interact with the device, you're taking in more mental clutter. A lot of it completely unnecessary, because you get all the mess. Sometimes it's important, but Facebook, why do I need to know what somebody is eating at this moment? What is the point? Why do I need to know where somebody is having a good time on vacation right now, and whatever they're doing? I don't need all these tweets. Why do I need to know what the President of the United States is tweeting now? I don't need to know that. It clutters my mind. All kinds of the continuous clutter is a mind that has no space in it whatsoever. And then you find these humans become very quickly, even youngsters already, are in need of medication. Their mind is disturbed. They cannot focus on anything for very long. They have attention deficit disorder. They're completely gone. It's a dreadful affliction. So we need to be very careful and then help our children too. But first you need to help yourself so that you can help your children too, not to get excessively drawn into these. One of the worst things you need to be aware of is mental clutter. Do not tolerate mental clutter. So make sure that there is space in your mind. This is one of the most important things. And the simple thing, as I said before, conscious breaths, 2-3 conscious breaths, create inner space. Alert contemplation of nature or anything that's around you, alert sense perception, creates an inner space. Feeling the inner body creates an inner space. Listening to another person in a state of alert attention is inner space. So there's nothing more important, because that's the being of you. The rest is the doing. If you get so trapped, every thinking is doing. If you got so trapped in the thinking, you're so cluttered, total loss of being. And that is the disease, the mental disease that a large section of humanity is now suffering from. It is a true, it's very serious mental disease. And unless that changes, I don't think civilization can survive for very long with millions of people suffering from that mental disease. Because how are they going to create anything truly new when their mind is continuously cluttered, when they cannot focus on anything for more than a few seconds? Because any creative act requires you to become still for a moment and then focus your attention and look at the situation, look at the problem in that focused, high alertness. That's how the creative process happens. If your mind is so cluttered that you can't do this anymore, you will never find again a creative solution to any of the problems that have already been created by the cluttered mind. And so you create one problem after another, but never any solution. And if you do think you have a solution, it came from your cluttered mind, and it will create more problems than it's solved. So you have to be real. The question is vital, because how to use your mind but stay spacious while you use it. It's continuous practice at first until it becomes second nature to you. So use all these things that I recommended to bring about spaciousness even while you're thinking. Step away from thinking, become still for a moment, take a few conscious breaths. Other things you can do when you get into your car, if you have a car, you sit in your car, break the stream of unconscious compulsive thinking. Take 30 seconds after you shut the door and just sit there and look around. 30 seconds is very little. The mind might tell you, no, I don't have time. unless you're in an emergency and you have to get to the hospital or whatever it is, everybody has time for 30 seconds when they get into a car. And what do you do in those 30 seconds? You don't do anything. You become aware of that you are, of being. You can breathe and you can look around. You've broken the momentum of doing. You've broken the momentum of the mind. You've created a space, actually even physically. 30 seconds every time you shut the door of your car, before you put the seatbelt on. It's wonderful. Then you can have other things that you, especially things you do habitually, every day, perhaps several times a day, whatever it may be, choose a few things and break the momentum of thinking while you're engaged in those activities. It could be that where you work or at home, there's a staircase, and you go up and down the staircase many times a day. Use that staircase and say, every time I use that staircase, I will be present with every step. And that breaks the momentum of the mind every time. Or if you don't have a staircase, if you have an elevator at where you work or where you live, every time I wait for the elevator, instead of getting out my phone for no reason whatsoever and going like this, I'm not going to get out my phone. I'm just going to be there in that moment and breathe consciously while the elevator is coming. And you might even include stepping into the elevator while it's going up or down. You're not looking at your phone. You keep it in your pocket and you're just present. So you use that moment. And choose any activity that you do frequently, habitually during the day, and apply presence to that activity that creates spaciousness. And then your mind is not continually using you, overpowering you. It removes clutter from your mind. And become aware of the drug that you carry in your pocket or in your purse, which is called your smartphone. It's a drug. So it has to be handled with great care. Use it when it's needed. Decide that you're not going to get it out just because there's nothing else to do. Whenever you're waiting for something, sometimes, of course, you may have to look at your phone. There's a reason why you might need to send a text message. There's nothing wrong with that. But to go through it and just randomly going through things on your phone clutters your mind for no purpose whatsoever. Any waiting period in your life, and you'd be surprised how many times you're actually waiting, for example, the traffic lights. Whether you're a pedestrian or whether you're a driver or you're a cyclist, there's a red light. Every red light could be a reminder for you to be present while it's red. And ultimately, people have worked out that when you reach the age of 70 and you've been driving since the age of 18, you spend several months of your life waiting at traffic light, if not a whole year or two, I can't remember how long, but a long time depending on your... So use traffic, any waiting, so that any waiting becomes an opportunity for being present. But you have to get rid of the habit of reaching for your phone when you're waiting for something. In the waiting room, some people, there's an airport, waiting at the airport. Okay, occasionally you may want to check, but maybe you have an app that tells you something about your flight. You can look there or send a text message, but not randomly going through. In a cafe, I don't do it anymore, but I used to do it, to go have a coffee and sit in a cafeteria. I love to sit in a corner. I haven't done it in years now, 2 years. Sit in a corner, quietly contemplating all the humans that are sitting there. And those humans, surprisingly, very few communicate with each other anymore. They all communicate with their devices. It's quite absurd. I've been in restaurants when they were looked around. Recently we were in a restaurant, there were 4 or 5 girls sitting around a round table. Each one of them was on their phone for most of the time. Couples on their phones. So I used to sit in, I may do it again, sit in a quiet corner in a cafe and just contemplate all the humans, but without judging them. And it's a beautiful thing. You're a point of presence, and there are all these humans, they're in their minds, on their phones, and it's fine, you're not judging, you just contemplate. It's extremely pleasant to contemplate human beings. Each one is so different, they're all expressions of the one life, and each human is so different. I love them. They may be a bit crazy, but I love them. And you just watch your point of presence in this energy field, which is contemplation. I sometimes still do it. I've been doing it for years. I sit in my car for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. No, your life may be too busy for that, but for 5 or 10 minutes and just contemplate the sky. There's a tree there. There's people walking. When I lived in England in my Russian Lada, I would often sit there in the countryside, and I could hear the rain on the roof of the car coming down. There's a meadow there, and there's a hedge there. Blissful, just listening to the sound of the rain in this little protected space. Just absolute. What could be better than that? Just sitting there, listening to the rain. What else could you ask for in life? But this, whenever you're really present, it's a beautiful, fully self-contained moment. You say, this moment is perfect. It may not be perfect on the external, but deep within it, this moment is perfect. So you're gradually learning to reduce the clutter in your mind, which is overthinking, excessive thinking. And I've been keeping you standing there for too long.
Thank you very much.
So, I think we'll take a break now for the night, a nocturnal break. And before we do that, though, if you don't mind, I'd like to go into stillness just for a few minutes. Eyes can be open or closed, it doesn't matter. If there's too much thinking in your mind, connect with either your breath, your inner body, abdominal breathing, or you can just look around the room in alert attention. But be aware of yourself, the presence, the consciousness. Thank you. I have a tiny time device on the floor here, digital. Only I can see it. It tells me that I've been speaking for 99 minutes.